I was wearing a mask, so he did not recognize me. When prescribing medication, he asked where the boy's father was. I softly replied that he was no longer around, but a single sentence from my son made him freeze. There are encounters in life that one might avoid for a whole decade. Yet, all it takes is one rainy night, a hospital, and a child with a high fever for everything you tried to bury to suddenly stand right in front of you. That night, Chloe only hoped her son would make it through his fever. She absolutely never expected the man in the white coat walking out to examine her child would be the man she thought she would never see again in her entire life. At 1:27 a.m., the Seattle sky was pouring rain. Long streaks of water ran down the windshield, blurring the streetlights outside into pale yellow halos. Chloe drove her SUV down Interstate 5 while constantly reaching over to check her son's forehead in the back seat. The palms of her hands were freezing, but the boy's forehead was so hot it made her heart clench. Oliver lay in his toddler car seat, his face flushed, his lips dry, his breathing heavy. Occasionally, he would call out in a very small voice, "Mom." Chloe immediately turned slightly. "I am right here, Oliver. Just hold on a little bit longer. We are almost at the hospital." "Mom, do I have to get a shot?" Hearing that question, Chloe felt a sting in her nose, but she tried to keep her voice calm. "Not necessarily, sweetie. Let the doctor check you first. Just be a good boy." Around 10:00 p.m., Oliver had only a slight fever. Chloe took his temperature, saw it was 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, gave him the proper dose of children's Tylenol, wiped him down with a warm washcloth, and stayed by his side to monitor him. She originally thought he just needed to make it through the night and he would feel better. But near 1:00 a.m., Oliver's temperature suddenly spiked to 103.6 degrees. The little boy shivered all over, then clutched his head, crying in pain. Chloe did not dare wait any longer. She hastily threw on a light cardigan, carried her son down to the car, and drove straight to the large medical center near downtown Seattle. The night streets were emptier than usual, but the heavy rain forced her to drive very slowly. In her mind at that moment, she could think of nothing else but praying for her son's safety. Arriving at the emergency room, Chloe carried Oliver inside, her hair and shoulders already soaked. The triage nurse quickly handed her a thermometer and guided her through the registration process. The number 103.6 flashing on the screen made her panic even more. "Mom, I am cold." Chloe pulled him close, her hand constantly rubbing the boy's back. "Mom is right here. Do not be afraid." A moment later, the medical staff called Oliver's name. Chloe carried her son into the examination room. The attending physician was bending over looking at the chart of another patient. He had neatly trimmed hair, a tall build, and a deep, calm voice. "Next high fever case." Chloe only heard those words. But when the man looked up, her footsteps suddenly halted. She recognized him immediately. Even though 5 years had passed, even though that face had matured and his eyes looked somewhat more exhausted, she could never mistake him. It was David, her ex-husband, and also the person she thought she would never meet again. Chloe immediately pulled her medical mask up higher, lowered her face, and instinctively pulled Oliver tighter against her body. She did not want him to recognize her, much less for this reunion to happen in such a stressful situation. David looked at her for a brief second, seemingly feeling something familiar about the woman in front of him, but his demanding job left him no time to ponder. "How old is the little guy?" Chloe tried to keep her voice completely normal. 5 years old. "Since when has he had a fever?" "Since about 10:00 p.m. At first, it was only 100.8 degrees, then it gradually increased. Near 1:00 a.m., it hit 103.6. David nodded, put on his stethoscope, and bent down to examine Oliver. "Open your mouth and let me see your throat, buddy." Oliver was exhausted but still obediently complied. David checked his throat, listened to his lungs, measured his heart rate, then asked a few more questions about his medical history and medications used. Chloe watched those familiar movements, feeling a sharp ache in her heart. 5 years ago, she had hoped this man could spare a little time for her like this. Yet when she needed him most, he always had a reason to be absent. David took notes on his clipboard while asking, Is he allergic to any medications? No. Any specific genetic diseases in the family? No. He nodded and then asked a very standard question. But to Chloe, it felt like a knife stab. Where is the boy's father? Could I get his phone number just in case we need to contact him? Chloe stayed silent for a few seconds, her hand gripping the fabric of her son's shirt. She knew this was just a professional protocol question from a doctor, but the person asking was David, making the answer so difficult that her throat choked up. Finally, she lowered her head and said very softly, "He is not around." David paused his pen. Did his father pass away? Chloe did not look at him. No, he is just no longer with our family. The bustling emergency room suddenly felt dead silent to Chloe. She only hoped David would not ask any more questions, hoping this night would pass quickly. But right at that moment, Oliver, lying in his mother's arms, weakly opened his eyes, his voice hoarse from the fever. Mom told me Dad went really far away. The tip of the pen in David's hand stopped completely. He looked up at the child, the usually calm eyes of the doctor showing a flicker of confusion for the very first time. Oliver innocently continued, "Mom said Dad lives in a place very far away, but I think it must be farther than this hospital." Chloe turned pale. "Oliver, you are sick. Stop talking." David did not answer right away. He looked at Oliver for a few more seconds. Then his gaze slowly shifted to the woman trying to hide her face behind the mask. A strange feeling suddenly emerged in his chest. The eyes of this child, the way he furrowed his brows when uncomfortable, even the small hand gripping his mother's shirt, everything gave him a feeling he had seen it somewhere a long time ago. David looked down at the medical chart again. The mother's name written on the paper was simply Chloe. His hand involuntarily gripped the pen tighter. He could not remember everything yet, but a premonition he himself did not want to believe was beginning to form. As for Chloe, she knew from the moment David saw that name, the 5 years she had tried to bury deep down had probably begun to resurface. And what she feared most was not David recognizing her. What she feared most was that one day he would realize Oliver was his own son. Chloe saw David freeze. She knew she could not stay in this room much longer. But Oliver was still running a fever, and the lab results were not back yet. So even though her mind was a tangled mess, she still had to sit down on the chair in the hallway, holding her son in her arms, telling herself that right now, the only important thing was Oliver's health. The issues between her and David, the story from 5 years ago, if she truly had to face them, she would deal with them later. Oliver rested his head on his mother's shoulder, his breathing slightly more even, but his cheeks were still flushed red from the fever. His small hand unconsciously grasped Chloe's hem, making her feel both pity for her son and an aching pain in her heart. Because for 5 years, she was used to raising her child alone, used to the nights he coughed, the mornings he had a fever, the times taking him to the clinic with just the two of them. She was also used to carefully choosing every single word whenever Oliver asked about his father, so a 5-year-old boy would not feel abandoned. "Mom, I am thirsty." Chloe immediately took a thermos of warm water from her bag, supported his head, and let him take small sips. "Drink slowly, honey, do not drink too fast." Oliver took a few sips, then lay down, his eyes half closed, but shortly after, he looked up toward the examination room. "Mom, what was that doctor's name?" Chloe was quiet for a few seconds. "David. Does he know you, Mom?" "No, he does not. But I saw him looking at you for a really long time." Her son's simple observation made Chloe unconsciously clench her fists. She did not want a child to understand adult matters, much less for Oliver to become the one who pulled her and David back to a past both had tried to leave behind. "He was just examining you, that is all." "Really, Mom?" "Yes." Oliver obediently nodded and closed his eyes again. Chloe watched her son sleep, unable to calm her heart. Because she knew David might not have recognized her yet, but his gaze just now was different, especially after Oliver accidentally mentioned his dad going very far away. And the thing she worried about most was the question regarding her son's date of birth. If David really paid attention, just a few numbers would let him realize Oliver was born almost exactly at the time they finalized their divorce. Right then, the clinic door opened. David walked out holding a stack of lab results. Chloe. Chloe looked up. This was the first time he had called her name correctly. Just that one word was enough to make her blood run cold. Yes. David stood at a reasonable distance, still maintaining the professional demeanor of a doctor talking to a patient's family. The test results show Oliver likely has a viral respiratory infection. There are no alarming signs at the moment, but because his fever was quite high, tonight you just need to monitor his temperature and his level of alertness. If he is unusually lethargic, has trouble breathing, or the fever persists, you must bring him back immediately. Chloe took the piece of paper. Yes, I understand. David did not leave right away. He looked at the sleeping Oliver and asked, "Does he get fevers like this often?" "Not often. His health is generally quite good." "You raise him all by yourself?" Chloe looked up. Their eyes met. That question no longer sounded like a routine medical inquiry. Yes. David remained silent. A moment later, he just gave a slight nod. "Then you should remember to take care of yourself too. Do not just worry about him." Hearing those words made Chloe's throat tighten. 5 years ago, someone had also said similar things to her. The only difference was, back then, she needed him by her side more than any verbal advice. "Thank you, doctor." She purposely called him doctor, as a way to remind both of them that they were just strangers crossing paths on a night in the ER. David said no more and returned to his office. But before the door closed, he instinctively looked back at the mother and son one more time. He could not understand why this woman gave him such a strong sense of familiarity. It was not just the eyes, not just the voice, but the way she held the child, the way she used her hand to shield her son's forehead, the way she always looked down before answering any question. Everything reminded him of someone he used to be so close to, someone he had not seen in 5 years. David returned to his desk, opened Oliver's medical chart, but his eyes were no longer focused on the text in front of him. The child's date of birth was clearly written. He looked at it once, then looked at it a second time. Oliver was born in the winter, not too long after the time he and Chloe signed the divorce papers. David sat frozen. He remembered that time very well. Remembered the house in the suburbs that used to hold two people. Remembered their final argument. Remembered Chloe's red eyes when she said she could not continue living in a marriage where she always had to wait. And remembered how exhausted he himself was to try and hold on. Back then, he thought perhaps Chloe truly wanted to leave. He signed the divorce papers believing it was the choice she desired. But now, a 5-year-old boy lying out in the hallway, carrying Chloe's last name, appeared exactly matching that timeline. David closed his eyes, trying to brush away the thought forming in his head. He could not rely on a few coincidences to jump to a conclusion about something this massive. But then he remembered Oliver's left hand. The child used his left hand to hold a pen. David was also left-handed. Oliver's habit of frowning when uncomfortable was also bizarrely similar to his own. David looked down at the paper, a question appearing in his heart for the first time that he dared not speak out loud. What if Oliver is really my son? Outside, Chloe was also trying to stay calm, but she did not know that just a few small details were enough to cause the wall she built up over 5 years to start cracking. Oliver suddenly woke up, rubbed his eyes, and saw David walking by. "Excuse me, sir." David stopped. "How are you feeling, buddy?" "Better. That is good." Oliver looked at the paper in David's hand and suddenly asked, "Do you know how to draw?" David was a bit surprised. "A little bit. Can you draw a dog for me?" Chloe was about to stop her son, but David offered a very faint smile. "Sure." He grabbed a pen, pulled over a piece of scratch paper, and slowly sketched a small dog. The strokes were simple but very neat, the ears flopping down a bit, round eyes, and a curled-up tail. Oliver stared without blinking. So pretty. David handed the paper to the boy. "Do you like it?" "Yes, I like it." Oliver clutched the paper to his chest, then turned to his mother. "Mom, the doctor draws better than you." Chloe felt both embarrassed and amused. "Keep talking like that, and I will not buy you any more comic books." David let out a soft chuckle, but the smile quickly faded when Oliver innocently asked, "Sir, do you have any kids?" David froze. "Not yet." "Then do you want to have a kid like me?" Chloe immediately spoke up. "Oliver." The boy looked at his mother. not understanding what he had said, to make her so tense. David looked at Chloe, his gaze much deeper this time. He did not ask any further, just gently said, "You should rest, do not talk too much." Oliver obediently lay down. Chloe pulled the blanket over her son and lowered her head. But in that moment, she knew she could not keep hiding forever. When morning approached, Oliver's temperature dropped to 100 degrees, and his spirit was much better. David prescribed medication and advised her to bring him back the next day for a checkup if the cough and fever persisted. Chloe picked Oliver up, wanting to leave the hospital almost immediately. But right as she stepped toward the door, David suddenly called out, "Chloe." She stopped. He did not call her by the formal title anymore. "I want to ask you something." Chloe did not turn her head. "What is it?" David looked toward Oliver, who was sleeping in her arms, and slowly asked, "What month was Oliver born?" Chloe closed her eyes. She knew the moment she feared most had finally arrived. She turned back to look at the man in front of her, her voice so calm that even she felt it was foreign. "December." David said nothing because that single answer made every memory in his head rush back at once. And for the first time in 5 years, he began to suspect that the marriage from back then might never have ended the way he always thought it did. Meanwhile, Chloe held her son tighter and walked out of the emergency room. But she did not know that behind her back, David was still standing there watching, and in his heart, he had already made a decision that even he did not have the courage to name yet. The next morning, when the sun just started peeking through, after a long rainy night, Chloe barely got any sleep at all. She lay next to Oliver, but every few minutes she would reach out to feel his forehead, look at the clock on the nightstand, and then look at her sleeping boy's face. The way David looked at her when he heard her say December kept replaying in her mind. That gaze was no longer the look of a doctor questioning a patient, but rather like someone who had just unexpectedly found a piece of a memory thought lost long ago. It made Chloe realize the secret she had tried to hide for 5 years could probably not be hidden anymore. Around 7:00 a.m., Oliver woke up. His temperature had dropped, but he was still exhausted, his voice hoarse. As soon as he opened his eyes, he asked, "Mom, do I have to go to the hospital again today?" Chloe sat down next to him and smoothed his messy hair. "If you are still tired, I will take you in for a follow-up. The doctor said we need to keep monitoring it." Oliver scrunched his face. "I do not like the hospital." "Then you have to take your medicine so you can get better quickly. I want to see the doctor from yesterday." Chloe's hand, which was holding a warm washcloth, stopped. "Why do you want to see him?" "I want to get another drawing of a dog." Chloe looked down at the small nightstand. The piece of paper David drew on last night was still carefully placed next to Oliver's pillow, right beside a red toy car. She could not understand why such a simple drawing made her son like it so much. But one thing she understood very clearly was that she did not want Oliver to meet David ever again until she knew exactly what she was facing. However, approaching 9:00 a.m., Oliver spiked a mild fever again. Although it was not high, because it had reached nearly 104 degrees the night before, Chloe did not dare be negligent. She changed his clothes, grabbed his medication and medical records, and drove Oliver back to the hospital. On the drive on Interstate 5, Oliver sat in the back, still holding the drawing of the dog. Occasionally, he looked out the window and asked, "Mom, does Mr. David work at this hospital every day?" Chloe slightly tightened her grip on the steering wheel. "You remembered his name that fast, because he draws pretty dogs." Chloe did not know whether to laugh or cry. She could only answer softly, "Do not ask so many questions. Once we get there, I will take you inside to be examined." But what Chloe did not know was that David also stayed awake almost the entire night. After his shift ended, he sat alone in his office for a very long time. In front of him was Oliver's medical chart. He could not arbitrarily look up non-professional information, nor could he use his position as a doctor to pry into a child's private life. But the details he remembered kept naturally connecting with each other, making him unable to shake the terrifying possibility that the child he just examined might be his own biological son. David remembered the day Chloe said they should break up, remembered the exhaustion in her eyes, remembered how she stood by the window for a long time without saying anything. And then he remembered an old text message he once received, but never knew held so much meaning. Are you free? I have something to tell you. That was the last text Chloe sent him before his mother called, saying since the two of them were divorced, they should leave each other in peace, that Chloe was just being emotionally unstable. That his medical residency at the time was highly critical, and he should not let personal matters affect his future career. Back then, David believed it. He did not know Chloe had just discovered she was pregnant. He also did not know that after that phone call, she deleted the messages she had not even sent yet. Fast forward 5 years to today. A child standing in front of him had a face that made it impossible not to think of himself. When Chloe brought Oliver to the examination room, David had just finished checking another patient. He looked up, and this time, there was no surprise like the night before. His gaze lingered on Chloe a bit longer, but he maintained the necessary composure. Is his fever down? Chloe nodded. It broke, but he felt a little warm this morning, so I brought him in to get checked. David turned to Oliver. Does your head still ache? Oliver shook his head. No, sir. My throat hurts a little. David checked Oliver again, wrote a few lines on the chart, and then looked at Chloe. You can continue monitoring him at home. There is no need for admission, but you must ensure he drinks enough fluids and keep track of his temperature. Chloe took the prescription. Thank you, doctor. David was quiet for a few seconds, then asked, could you stay behind for a moment after the exam? Chloe instantly understood. There is no need. The matter's between us. David looked at her. I have not said anything yet. Chloe was at a loss for words. Oliver sat on the exam chair, not understanding why the two adults were looking at each other like that. The little boy held up the drawing. Mr. David, look, I brought the drawing. David looked at the picture, his eyes softening. Keep it safe, I drew it for you. Okay. Oliver looked up and asked, can you draw another one? Chloe hurriedly interjected. Oliver, let us go home. But David gently replied, sure, I will draw you one next time. Chloe froze. The phrase next time made her feel uneasy, because she knew if David started appearing in Oliver's life, she would never be able to return to her peaceful life from before. After taking Oliver out to the lobby, Chloe intended to leave the hospital immediately. But right as she reached the end of the hallway, she heard David's voice behind her. Chloe, wait. She stopped. David did not chase after her, just stood a few feet away, his voice very low. The child was born in December. He is 5 years old this year. Chloe did not answer. Is his birthday December 21st? Chloe's expression changed. She never expected him to still remember that that day was Oliver's birthday, which was also the day she lay in the delivery room all by herself, looking at the tiny pink baby in her arms, not knowing how to face the world. David saw her reaction and almost had his answer. Chloe, I just want to know one thing. She turned around. What do you want to know? David looked at Oliver standing next to his mother, then back at her, his voice hoarse. Is Oliver my son? The hospital hallway still had people walking back and forth, the sound of medicine carts, the intercom paging patients, medical staff talking to each other. Everything proceeded normally, but to Chloe, that moment felt as if the entire world had just gone silent. She thought she could hide the answer for a lifetime. She used to think that as long as she did not say anything, Oliver would grow up in peace, David would have his own life, and she would raise her child alone, needing no pity, needing no one to come back out of mere obligation. But faced with that question, she could not lie anymore. Chloe looked at David for a long time, then softly replied, yes, just one word, but it made David stand completely frozen. He looked at Oliver, then back at Chloe, his eyes turning red, though not a single teardrop fell. My son. Chloe immediately corrected him. Your son, but also my son. And for the past 5 years, I have raised him all by myself. David nodded very slowly. I understand. You do not understand. Chloe's voice remained calm, but every word was heavy. You have no idea what happened over the last 5 years. I know I do not know. David did not try to defend himself. That is why I want to hear it. Chloe checked her watch, then looked at Oliver, who was leaning tiredly against her leg. Not here. David nodded. Fine. Tonight after my shift ends, I will wait for you at the back entrance of the hospital. Chloe did not answer immediately, because she knew that conversation could alter the lives of all three of them. Finally, she just said, "Do not mention anything in front of Oliver. I will not. And do not rush to claim him. Do not rush to buy him things. Do not do anything to make the boy think you have become his father overnight." David looked at her for a long time, then replied, "I understand." Chloe picked Oliver up and walked away. But just a few steps later, she heard David say from behind, "Chloe." She turned back. David stood under the bright fluorescent lights of the hallway, his voice incredibly soft. "If I had known about Oliver 5 years ago, I definitely would have been there." Chloe looked at him, her eyes stinging, but she still shook her head. "But you did not know." She turned away, leaving David standing alone in the crowded hallway. As for him, for the first time in 5 years, there was an emptiness in his heart that work, the hospital, or night shifts, could never fill. Because he just learned he had a son. And the most painful part was not that he had lost 5 years, but that for 5 years, he had absolutely no idea what he was losing. Right as Chloe stepped out of the hospital, she heard Oliver calling from behind. The little boy jogged a few steps before remembering he was exhausted. She quickly turned around and picked him up. Meanwhile, David remained standing in the hallway, not taking another step, because he understood very well that just one hasty action right now could cause Chloe to instantly rebuild the fortress she had guarded for 5 years. On the drive back, Oliver lay quietly in his mother's arms, one hand still gripping the dog drawing. But it seemed the boy realized his mother had a lot on her mind, so he did not ask many questions. Only when the SUV pulled into the driveway of their suburban home did Oliver softly ask, "Mom, is Mr. David someone you used to know?" Chloe unbuckled his seatbelt, stayed quiet for a moment, and replied, "Yes, Mom used to know him." "For a long time?" "Yes, a long time." "Then why are you not happy when you see him?" The questions of a child are always simple, but adults sometimes take years to find the courage to answer them. Chloe rubbed her son's head, forcing a smile. "Because there are old memories that make people sad. But you do not need to worry. Let the adults handle adult matters." Oliver nodded, then wrapped his arms around her neck. "If you are sad, I will hug you." Hearing that, Chloe felt a sting in her nose. She hugged him tighter, feeling both overwhelming love and a bitter ache. For 5 years, she always told herself that as long as she was strong, Oliver would never lack love. But the moment David appeared, she realized there are voids that a mother alone simply cannot fill. That afternoon, Oliver took a long nap, while Chloe sat at her home office desk. In front of her were unfinished architectural blueprints, but she could not focus. The cell phone resting beside her remained silent for a long time before suddenly lighting up. A text message from an unknown number. "Chloe, this is David. I do not want to bother you, I just want to say that tonight, but if you are willing, I want to listen to you tell me everything that happened over the last 5 years." Chloe stared at those words for a very long time, her finger hovering over the screen before pulling back. She used to wish for the day David would ask this question, but when that day actually arrived, she did not know if she wanted to answer or run away. She remembered the months of pregnancy, the mornings of morning sickness so bad she could not eat a thing, the times she drove herself to her OB/GYN appointments, the nights Oliver cried and refused to sleep, the days she juggled freelance work while caring for a baby. There were days she was so exhausted she fell asleep right on the living room floor, yet the next morning she still had to wake up on time to take him to preschool. She thought she had forgotten it all. Turns out, she had only learned how to stop talking about it. Around 6:00 p.m., Chloe sent a text back. "I will be there, but we are only talking about Oliver." David replied almost instantly. "Okay." That evening, Chloe asked her cousin to babysit Oliver for a while and drove back to the hospital alone. David was waiting at the back entrance just as he promised. No flowers, no gifts, no lengthy explanations. He just wore a simple button-down shirt after getting off his shift. His face looked more tired than usual. The two stood at a comfortable distance. David was the first to speak. "Thank you for coming." Chloe did not beat around the bush. "What do you want to know?" David looked at her, speaking slowly. First of all, I want to know why you never told me. Chloe let out a faint laugh, but there was no joy in it at all. I was planning to tell you. When? Right after I saw the two pink lines on the pregnancy test. David went silent. Chloe looked down at her hands. That morning, I sat in the bathroom for almost half an hour, crying and laughing at the same time. Even though our marriage was in a terrible state right then, I still thought a child could be a beautiful thing. I thought if you knew, maybe we would sit down and talk things out again. David softly asked, "Then why didn't you tell me in the end?" "Because your mother called me." David's head snapped up. "My mother?" Chloe nodded. "She said you were at a critical stage in your medical residency. She said since we were already divorced, I should leave you alone. She also told me not to keep trying to contact you, because if I kept reaching out, it would only make things harder for you." David closed his eyes. "I never knew about that." "I know." Chloe looked at him. "But at that time, I did not know whether you knew or not." David was quiet for a long time. "Did you send me a text message?" "Yes. I never got it because after your mother called, I deleted it." David lowered his head, intertwining his fingers. "Chloe, I am so sorry." She immediately shook her head. "Do not apologize so quickly." "Why?" "Because if you are only apologizing because you saw Oliver, I do not need it." David looked up. "I do not want you coming back out of guilt, nor do I want Oliver to be the reason you have to live a life you do not want. I do not see it that way. What you think right now, I do not know yet." That statement left David with no way to argue. Chloe continued. "You might be Oliver's father, but to truly become a dad, you need time. Oliver needs time too, and I need time more than anyone." David nodded. "I understand. You are not allowed to take Oliver anywhere without telling me first. No buying him excessive amounts of toys. No saying things that make him misunderstand our current relationship. And most importantly, do not promise things you are not absolutely sure you can deliver." David looked at her intently, then said, "I agree." Chloe was a bit surprised. "I do not know how to be a father yet, but I want to learn." That sentence made Chloe's heart tremble slightly. Because this was the first time she had heard David talk about fatherhood without trying to make excuses for what had happened. David asked, "Can I see Oliver?" Chloe remained silent. "Not necessarily today, only if you are ready. But I want to start with small things. For instance, taking him to his checkups, playing with him, listening to his stories, helping him with his preschool homework, if you agree." Chloe looked at him. "You are thinking too far ahead. I missed out on 5 years. So maybe now, I have to learn how to think a little further ahead." Chloe turned her face away, not wanting him to see her eyes tearing up. But right at that moment, David's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned slightly. "It is my mother, Eleanor." He did not answer right away. Chloe saw the caller ID, and her tension spiked. "Answer it." David shook his head. "There is no need. You should clear things up with her." David looked at Chloe, then accepted the call. His mother spoke on the other end for quite a while. David's expression gradually changed. "What did you just say?" Chloe could not hear clearly, only seeing David stand up straighter. "Since when did Chloe come see you?" The other end was silent. David asked again, his voice dropping an octave. "You knew she was pregnant back then?" Chloe stood next to him, her entire body stiffening. She never expected that the story she thought only she, David, and his mother knew actually involved someone else. David listened to a few more sentences, then said, "I will come home to talk." He hung up, standing perfectly still for a long time. Chloe looked at him. What did she say? David did not answer immediately. When he looked up, his eyes were completely different. "My mom said, 5 years ago, she ran into you at a clinic." Chloe froze. "Which clinic?" David gripped his phone. "The clinic, where you had your first prenatal ultrasound." Chloe felt as if an old door had just been forced open, dragging out a part of the past she thought she had buried tight. If David's mother knew she was pregnant from that exact moment, why did she claim she had no idea Oliver existed? David looked at her, his voice raspy. "Chloe, I think we missed something very important." What is it? It was not just my mother stopping you from contacting me. He paused, pronouncing every word carefully. It is possible she knows a lot more than we thought. Chloe stood completely still. In her mind flashed the image from 5 years ago, the day she left the clinic with the ultrasound printout in her hand. And for the first time, she suddenly remembered a detail she had ignored for all these years. That day, besides David's mother, there was another woman standing outside the examination room, staring at her for a very long time. A woman she had assumed was just another patient's relative. But what if that person was involved? Chloe looked at David, her palms turning cold. She knew the story of Oliver was perhaps just beginning to unfold. The real secret lay 5 years in the past, on the exact day she held the paper confirming she was pregnant, and walked out of the clinic all alone. Chloe stood in front of the hospital entrance for a long time. Only when David repeated for the second time that he would not force her to remember everything right away, did she slowly sit down on the nearby bench. Her eyes stared at the road ahead, but her mind drifted back to 5 years ago. To a winter morning she once believed would simply fade away along with her heartbreak. Who would have thought that a single question from David today would make the seemingly blurred memories become terrifyingly clear? David, you said your mother ran into me at the clinic. Are you sure? That is exactly what my mother just said. But what did she tell you? She claimed that day she only bumped into you in the hallway by chance, learned you were pregnant, but did not know the baby was mine. Chloe let out a faint laugh. Did not know. David looked at her, his heart feeling even heavier. That is what my mother said. And do you believe it? David fell silent. This was the first time Chloe saw hesitation in his eyes. She understood that even though he was her son, even though he used to trust his mother implicitly, after what just happened, he himself was starting to realize there were things in the past that were never fully explained. You do not need to answer right now, Chloe stood up. But I want to tell you something. That year, I did not just see your mother once. David instantly looked at her. Who else was there? I do not remember the name, but there was a woman standing outside the exam room. What do you remember about her? Around 40 years old, short hair, wearing a beige trench coat, holding a blue file folder. She stared at me for a very long time, then walked away with your mother. David frowned. My mother left with that person? Yes. But at the time, I thought nothing of it. I just assumed she was a friend of hers. David thought for a moment, then said, my mother has a close friend named Mrs. Higgins. She used to work in the administration office of that hospital. Chloe paused slightly. Higgins. Yes, but I do not know if she is the person you mentioned. Chloe tried to recall the face from years ago, but the memory was too old, leaving only fragmented images. I was in such a panic that day, I did not look closely. David nodded. It is okay, let me look into this. Chloe immediately looked at him. Do not do anything that makes your mother think I am trying to stir up trouble. I have no intention of stirring up trouble. Then what do you plan to do? I want to know the truth. That short answer silenced Chloe. She knew the David of today was different from the man from 5 years ago, but she still did not trust him enough to hand over all her trauma. I just need you to remember one thing, Chloe said slowly. I do not want to dig up the past to assign blame. I only want to understand why everything ended up the way it did back then. David nodded. Me too. The two left the hospital in silence. But before Chloe got into her car, David called her back. Chloe. Yes? If what happened back then involves my mother, I will not cover up for her. Chloe looked at him for a few seconds. Do not say that before you know the truth. I know, because regardless of who it is, my 5 years can never be returned. David lowered his head. I understand. Chloe got in her car, while David stood watching until her SUV disappeared down the road. That night, David returned to his house later than usual. His mother, Eleanor, was sitting in the living room. On the coffee table was a pot of tea that had already gone cold. It seemed she had been waiting for him for a long time. You are home? David tossed his keys down. Mom, I want to ask you something. Eleanor looked at her son. What is it? 5 years ago? Did you run into Chloe at the clinic? Eleanor was quiet for a moment before answering. Yes. Then why did you tell me today? that you only ran into her by chance. She flinched slightly. I did not want you to overthink things. I have already overthought plenty. David pulled out a chair and sat down. When did you know Chloe was pregnant? Eleanor did not answer. Mom, about a month after we divorced. David looked at her, his voice dropping. Just 1 month later. Yes. Then why didn't you tell me? Eleanor put her teacup down, her eyes starting to turn red. Because at that time you were in the most critical period of your medical residency. I was afraid you would get back together with her purely out of obligation. But that is my child. I did not know for sure. Did Chloe tell you that? Eleanor remained silent. David stood up. You knew. You knew she was pregnant, didn't you? Eleanor finally nodded. Yes. David turned his face away. His fists clenched and then released. He did not want to lose his temper, let alone break his mother's heart, but the sense of betrayal in his chest was overwhelming. Did you know she wanted to tell me? Yes. Then why did you stop her? Eleanor lowered her head. Because I thought you two were already divorced. If you knew about the baby, you would go back just for the sake of responsibility. Later on, you would both end up miserable again. David smiled bitterly. You thought you were protecting me, but do you realize you cost me 5 years? Eleanor burst into tears. I did not know the baby was a boy, nor did I know how he would grow up, but I knew he existed. That statement left the room in dead silence. David sat back down across from his mother. I do not blame you for worrying about me, but I cannot treat this as if it never happened. Eleanor wiped her tears. What are you going to do? Do you want to take Oliver? Do you want to claim him right now? No. David shook his head. I want to get to know him first. Let him know who I am. Then when Chloe feels it is the right time, I will tell him the truth. Eleanor looked at her son. Will Chloe agree to that? I will respect her decision. Eleanor kept her head down for a very long time, then whispered, I want to see my grandson. David looked at her. Not yet. You are his grandmother. But Oliver does not know who you are yet. You cannot just show up and demand he call you grandma. Eleanor choked on her words. Then what should I do? Wait. That one word forced her into silence. Wait until Chloe agrees. That night, David could not sleep. Chloe also sat by Oliver's bed for a long time, watching her son sleep soundly. Then she opened an old box and pulled out a yellowed piece of paper. It was the ultrasound printout from 5 years ago. In the corner of the paper was her handwriting noting the date. Beneath it was a tiny sentence she had written to herself. My baby, Mommy will try her best, so you never feel like you were abandoned. Chloe gently stroked the paper. Tears fell, but she did not cry out loud. At that same moment, David unlocked his phone, stared at Chloe's number for a long time, but did not call. Because he knew some things could not be fixed with a simple phone call. The next morning, while Chloe was making breakfast for Oliver, her phone suddenly buzzed with a text from David. This weekend, if you agree, I would like to take Oliver to the park with you. Just for 1 hour. Chloe read it over and over. Before she could reply, Oliver ran out of his room, still clutching the dog drawing from the other day. Mom, I want to see Mr. David this weekend. Chloe looked at her son. Why? Because he promised next time he would draw me a dinosaur. Chloe did not realize that such a tiny promise would pave the first step for David to enter Oliver's life. But it also dragged along someone else who was quietly preparing to surface, the woman who stood outside the clinic with David's mother 5 years ago. And this time, she would bring a truth that none of the three could ever anticipate. By the weekend, Chloe still had not replied to David's text. She left her phone on the kitchen counter and continued making pancakes for Oliver. But the boy's words about wanting to see Mr. David kept echoing in her mind. Kids do not understand adult complications. He only remembered the man who sat by his bed when his fever was high, who drew him a dog with a few simple strokes, and who promised to draw a dinosaur. As for Chloe, she understood that if she kept avoiding this forever, Oliver would sooner or later wonder why this man cared about him so much. Mom, did you text Mr. David back yet? Oliver asked while munching on his toast. Not yet. Then reply to him. Do you really want to go to the park that much? Oliver nodded rapidly. I want to see him draw a dinosaur. Chloe looked at her son and finally picked up her phone. Okay, but only for 1 hour. Less than a minute after hitting send, a reply came. Thank you. I will keep it simple. You do not need to bring anything. Chloe stared at the message, a strange feeling blooming in her chest, because the old David never asked what she needed. He always thought that as long as he worked hard, made money, and fulfilled his duties, the family would naturally be fine. Now, he was starting to learn how to ask, how to wait, how not to make decisions for others. On Sunday morning, the sky was clearer after days of rain. Chloe took Oliver to the neighborhood park. David was already standing under a large oak tree, holding a box of crayons and a new sketch pad. No expensive toys, no gifts that would make Oliver feel bribed. Just a man showing up on time, waiting for a mother and her son. The moment Oliver saw him, he ran over. Mr. David. David squatted down to eye level with the boy. Are you completely better? I am all better. Did you bring the dinosaur? Yes. David pulled out the sketch pad. But I need your help. Help with what? You have to pick if I should draw a plant-eating dinosaur or a meat-eating dinosaur. Oliver thought very seriously and replied, Plant-eating. Because it is nice. David chuckled. Okay, then I will draw the nice one. A brontosaurus. Chloe stood a few feet away, watching the two of them, one big and one small, sitting together. A feeling she did not want to name surfaced in her heart. She knew David was trying, but she also reminded herself that one beautiful morning could not erase 5 years of absence. Oliver quickly dragged David to see the duck pond, pointing out the little fish swimming near the surface. Miss David, when you were little, did you go to the park a lot? Yes. With who? David paused for a moment. With my mom and dad. Did your dad draw pictures for you? David looked at Oliver. No, my dad did not know how to draw. Oliver smiled. Then you are better than your dad. David smiled back, but his heart sank. He suddenly realized a child could make an adult reevaluate their entire childhood with just a few simple questions. Nearly an hour passed quickly. Oliver played until he was tired, then sat down on a park bench to drink some water. David opened his bag and pulled out a small apple juice box. Here you go. Oliver took it and turned to his mother. Mom, Mr. David remembered I like this juice. Chloe looked at David. You remembered? Yes. Oliver drank this brand at the hospital the other day. Chloe gave a slight nod, saying nothing. But she realized David was paying attention to very small details. Not to score points with her, but because he was genuinely trying to memorize things about his son. Right then, David's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then stepped aside to answer. A woman's voice came through the speaker. Although Chloe could not hear every word, she saw David's expression change. Mom, I already talked to you about this. A moment later, he continued. No, you cannot meet Oliver yet. Chloe watched him from a distance, her nerves tightening. After the call ended, David walked back. My mother wants to see Oliver. Right. Chloe remained silent. She knew I was taking Oliver to the park today. Did you tell her? She asked me. Chloe looked at him. Did you tell her where we are? No. That quick and firm answer made Chloe feel slightly more at ease. David sat down next to her. I told my mother that unless you agree, she is absolutely not allowed to see him. Chloe looked at her son playing with a fallen leaf on the ground. Thank you. This was the first time she thanked David without it sounding like mere politeness. David just gave a small nod. It is what I should do. After the park outing, Chloe took Oliver home, while David headed back to the hospital. But before they parted ways, Oliver suddenly ran up and hugged David's leg. Mr. David, next week draw another one for me, okay? David looked at Chloe, as if waiting for permission. Chloe thought for a moment, then said, if he is not busy. David smiled. I will make time. That phrase made Chloe freeze slightly. 5 years ago, she had heard, if I'm not busy or let me see when I'm free, way too many times. Today, this man was saying I will make time. She did not know if he had truly changed or was just trying his best in these early days. But at least this time, She saw him actively prioritizing his family and his schedule instead of expecting everyone to adapt to his career. That evening, after Oliver fell asleep, Chloe was cleaning out a closet when she unexpectedly found an old envelope buried deep under a box of paperwork. There was no name on the outside, but inside was a copy of her prenatal checkup record from 5 years ago. She looked at the date on the paper and suddenly remembered the woman in the beige trench coat. That day, it was not just a passing glance. She had appeared in front of the clinic door, and what sent a chill down Chloe's spine was that the woman held a blue folder identical to the one David's mother was holding. Chloe immediately called David. He picked up almost instantly. "What is wrong?" "I remembered the woman from that day." "Who?" "The one with your mother." "What else do you remember?" Chloe looked at the envelope in her hand. She was holding a blue folder. The other end of the line went silent for a few seconds. "Chloe, are you sure?" "I am sure." "Do you remember her name?" "No." David thought for a second, then said, "I will ask my mother. Do not ask over the phone." "Why?" "Because I have a feeling this is not a simple matter." David fell silent. Chloe continued. "That day, after leaving the clinic, I received a phone call from a strange number. The caller just told me I should take good care of the baby and stop bothering your life." David immediately sat up straight. "You never told me this." "Because I thought it was just a warning." "Did the person say their name?" "No." "Was it a man or a woman's voice?" "A woman's." David gripped his phone. "Chloe, do you still have that phone number?" "No, it has been too long." "It is okay." He paused, then said, "I will look into it myself." Chloe softly replied, "Do not do anything drastic." "I know." After the call ended, David sat alone in his living room, opening old family documents. And when he found a photo taken at a family gathering many years ago, he unexpectedly saw the woman standing next to his mother, the one with short hair and a beige coat that Chloe had described. Her name was written on the back of the photo. Sarah. David stared at the name for a very long time, then remembered something else. Sarah used to work at the exact same hospital where Chloe went for her prenatal exams 5 years ago. And after she quit her job, she still kept in touch with his mother. What unsettled him the most was that around the time Chloe was pregnant, Sarah had casually asked him a very bizarre question. "If one day your ex came back because she had your child, what would you do?" At the time, he just laughed and said that was impossible. Thinking back now, that question was never a random thought. The next morning, David called his mother. "Mom, I want to meet with Mrs. Higgins." The other line was silent for a very long time. Finally, Eleanor asked, "Why are you looking for her?" David looked out the window. "I want to ask her about what happened 5 years ago." "I do not think you should." Eleanor interjected softly, but firmly. "I do not want to assign blame. I just want to know the truth." Eleanor sighed. "Fine, but I have to tell you something first." "What is it?" "Mrs. Higgins moved out of Seattle a long time ago." David froze. "Moved where?" "Nobody knows exactly." That answer silenced David. A woman who knew about the events from 5 years ago, who appeared with his mother at the clinic, and then quietly left the city right when everything started being dug up. It clearly did not seem like a normal coincidence anymore. Meanwhile, that same afternoon, Chloe received a phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end only said one short sentence. "Chloe, if you want Oliver to stay safe, there are things from 5 years ago you had better not dig up." Chloe stood frozen by the window, the hand holding the phone, turning icy cold. Because she did not know who the caller was. But she knew one thing for certain. Someone still wanted to keep the secret from 5 years ago hidden. And this time, that person knew Oliver existed. Chloe stood by the window for a very long time after the call. The phone screen had gone dark, but her hand remained in the same position. Her mind kept replaying that final sentence from the stranger. A seemingly ordinary threat that sent shivers down her spine. Because over the past 5 years, she had never told anyone about her private life. She never told outsiders that David had just reappeared and knew Oliver was his son. So who in the world was calling? How did they know? And why did they show up right when she started seeking the truth? She immediately checked the call log, but it only showed an unknown number with no caller ID. She tried dialing back, but it could not be reached, making the anxiety in her chest grow even stronger. However, she tried to compose herself, because Oliver was in the living room, and she did not want her son to see her panicked. "Mom?" Oliver's voice called out from behind, snapping Chloe out of her daze. She turned around. "You have not taken your nap yet. I am thirsty." She put the phone down, poured him a cup of warm water, and sat down next to his bed. "Drink slowly." Oliver finished the water and looked at his mom. "Are you sad?" Chloe smiled. "No, just a little tired." "Is it because of Mr. David?" Chloe froze. "What makes you think that? Whenever someone talks about him, you get really quiet." Chloe did not know how to explain this to a 5-year-old. Finally, she just gently pulled the blanket over him. "Oliver, there are people who used to be very important to Mom. But that is adult stuff. You just need to know that Mom loves you." Oliver nodded, but then suddenly asked, "Is Mr. David important then?" Chloe looked at her son for a long time. "Yes, he used to be very important." "What about now?" Chloe did not answer right away. "Right now, Mom doesn't know yet." Oliver thought for a moment, then said, "I think he is a good guy." Hearing that, Chloe felt her heart soften but also fill with worry, because she understood that once Oliver started growing attached to David, all future decisions would no longer be hers alone to make. The next morning, David showed up at Chloe's house, but he did not just walk in. He stood outside the apartment complex and called her. "I want to talk about the phone call from yesterday." Chloe walked downstairs. "You know about it?" "I am not wiretapping you. My mother called me this morning." David handed her a small slip of paper. "This is the information I found on the phone number." Chloe took it. There were only a few short lines. "Burner phone. Prepaid. Inactive." She looked at David. "Who do you think called?" "I do not know yet." "Then why are you here?" "Because I do not want you dealing with this all alone." Chloe was slightly taken aback. David continued, "But I also do not want you to be overly terrified. It could just be someone who knows the story trying to apply pressure. It does not necessarily mean they intend to do anything." Chloe nodded. "I just do not want this affecting Oliver. Then from today on, if you get any weird calls or texts, save them. Do not delete them." "Okay." David looked up at the apartment window. "Where is Oliver?" "Doing some coloring." "Is he fully recovered?" "Yes." David gave a faint smile. "Then can I see him this weekend?" Chloe was about to answer when Oliver ran down the stairs. "Mr. David." David immediately turned around. "Are you feeling better?" "Yes." "Did you draw the dinosaur for me yet?" "Not yet. I was waiting for you to pick which kind. The long neck one." "Okay." Oliver ran up to him, completely unaware of the complex issues the adults were discussing. Watching them, Chloe felt a mix of warmth and unease. Because she knew David was no longer an outsider standing on the sidelines. He had truly stepped into Oliver's world, and that meant she had to be even more careful. Right then, David's phone rang. He looked at the screen and frowned. "It is my mother." He answered, "I am listening." The other side spoke for quite a while. David said nothing until the end of the call. "I will be right there." He hung up, his face turning serious. "My mother wants to see me." Chloe asked. "What happened?" "My mom said Mrs. Higgins called her." Chloe was startled. "Where is she?" "I do not know." "Then why call your mom?" Looking at Chloe, he said, "Mrs. Higgins said she wants to meet me to talk about 5 years ago." Chloe remained silent. A confusing feeling washed over her because the woman they had been searching for over the past few days had finally reached out on her own. David said, "I am going to meet her." "You are going alone?" "Yes." Chloe looked at him. "If she says anything concerning me, you have to ask for the details." "I know. And do not believe everything right away." David nodded. "I will listen, then verify." He turned to Oliver. "I have to go run an errand." Oliver immediately asked, "Will you be gone long?" "I do not know, but I will come back. Remember to bring the dinosaur drawing." David smiled. "I will remember." Chloe watched the two of them, suddenly feeling that statement sounded like a very small promise but held much more significance than she thought. That afternoon, David arrived at a quiet coffee shop based on the address Mrs. Higgins sent him, but she was not there. He waited for almost half an hour until a woman in her late 40s walked in. He instantly recognized her as the person in the old photo. David. Yes. Mrs. Higgins sat down across from him. I knew you would come looking for me. How did you know? Because you finally met Chloe. David looked at her. You knew Oliver was my son. Mrs. Higgins stayed silent. Since when did you know? Since the very beginning. David said nothing. Mrs. Higgins looked down at her water glass. 5 years ago, I was the one who processed Chloe's paperwork at the clinic, so you knew she was pregnant. Yes, and you knew the baby was mine, Mrs. Higgins nodded. David took a deep breath. Then why did you stay quiet? Mrs. Higgins did not answer immediately. She looked out the glass window, speaking slowly. Because at that time, there was something you did not know. What was it? Chloe was not the only one who wanted to keep the baby a secret. David froze. What do you mean? Mrs. Higgins took an old envelope out of her purse and placed it on the table, but she did not push it toward him. In the file from that year, there was a special note. What kind of note? Before giving birth, Chloe requested the hospital not to disclose her pregnancy information to anyone besides herself. David looked at her. Why? Because she was afraid your family would come looking for her. David closed his eyes. He began to understand that 5 years ago, Chloe did not just leave in anger. She was genuinely terrified, and so isolated that she proactively asked the hospital to keep her records sealed. But Mrs. Higgins continued, that is not the most important part. David opened his eyes. Then what is? Mrs. Higgins looked straight at him. The day Chloe came in for her checkup, she did not just talk about being pregnant. What else did she say? She asked me a question. What question? Mrs. Higgins slowly answered. She asked if the father of the child did not know he had a kid, would the child later have the right to know the truth? David lowered his head, his hands resting on the table, trembling slightly from emotion. He never expected that from the very first day, Chloe had thought about her son's right to know his father. It was just that later on, misunderstandings and silence had pushed everything in a different direction. But Mrs. Higgins was not finished. Now I need to tell you something that I have not told anyone over the last 5 years. David looked up. What is it, Mrs. Higgins looked at him for a long time before saying, that day, after Chloe left the clinic, your mother came back to find me. What for? To get a copy of the medical file. David was stunned. My mother took Chloe's file? Yes. But the hospital cannot just arbitrarily hand over patient records. Because she was your family, and since I had already resigned from my official position by then, it could not be done officially, but she asked me for a favor. David looked at the envelope on the table. What is in there? Mrs. Higgins pushed the envelope forward. This is the only copy I still have. David opened the envelope, but as soon as he saw the first line on the paper, his expression instantly changed. Because in the file from 5 years ago, there was an added note he had never seen before. And beneath that note was the name of a person he never expected to appear in this story. Mrs. Higgins looked at his face and whispered, David, before you blame your mother, you should read the whole thing. Because 5 years ago, the person who decided to keep the secret was not just one person. David looked down and kept reading. Meanwhile, back at the house, Chloe was preparing dinner for Oliver when her phone buzzed again. This time, it was not an unknown number. It was a text message containing exactly one sentence. If David has met with Mrs. Higgins, you should also prepare to hear the truth about the day Oliver was born. Chloe stood frozen. The spoon in her hand dropped onto the counter. And she understood that the past she tried to forget was not just coming back, but this time, it was dragging Oliver into a truth she never thought she would have to speak out loud. Chloe stood frozen by the kitchen counter, her eyes glued to the text message on her phone screen. Her mind instantly pictured David's name and his meeting with Mrs. Higgins. She did not know who sent the text, nor did she understand how the sender knew David had found Mrs. Higgins. But what scared her most was the last sentence. Because if someone truly knew the details of the day Oliver was born, that person might hold a piece of the past that even she herself was unaware of. Mom, what are you doing? Oliver's voice echoed from the living room, startling Chloe. She quickly locked her phone screen, trying to keep her voice normal. Mom is cooking dinner. Are you hungry? I am hungry. Then sit tight and wait a little bit. Chloe slipped the phone into her pocket, but her heart was no longer calm. She knew she had to call David immediately. However, just as her finger tapped his name, the phone buzzed. This time, it was an incoming call from David himself. Chloe, I just met with Mrs. Higgins. Chloe remained silent for a few seconds. What did she say? A lot of things, but there is one thing I need to tell you first. What is it? My mother really did know you were pregnant. Chloe closed her eyes. I guessed as much, but wait. I am not the only one who knew. Chloe opened her eyes. What do you mean? In the medical file from that year, there was a very strange note. Mrs. Higgins said you requested the hospital to keep your pregnancy information confidential, but later someone asked to see the file. Who? David did not answer immediately. Not confirmed yet. Hearing that made Chloe even more anxious. Where are you right now? I am heading home. Did you ask your mother yet? Yes. But she refuses to tell me everything. Chloe gripped her phone tightly. David, I just got a text message. What message? She read the exact text to him. The other end of the line was silent for a very long time. Chloe, did you save the text? Yes. Do not delete it. I am coming over. No need. Oliver is home. I will not come inside. I just want to talk to you. Chloe glanced toward the living room. Oliver was sitting on the rug, lining up his toy cars in a long row, completely oblivious that the adults were standing on the precipice of a story that could change his entire life. Okay. About 20 minutes later, David arrived outside her apartment complex. He did not come up, but waited in the lobby. Chloe left Oliver upstairs with her cousin and went down to meet him. As soon as David saw her, he asked, Are you sure the person who texted knows about Oliver? I do not know, but they know Mrs. Higgins. Then we have to be careful. Chloe looked at him. Did you read the file yet? Yes. What is in it? David pulled out a copy that was placed inside a document folder. There is a note made after your first ultrasound appointment. Chloe took it. Her eyes immediately landed on the text at the bottom. Patient requests no information be released to outside parties without patient consent. She read it over and over. This was my request. Yes. So what is unusual? David pointed to the section below it. Here is an added line written afterward. Chloe followed his finger. Husband's family has been notified of patient's pregnancy. She froze. I never consented to that. That is the issue. Chloe felt her hands turn icy. Do you think your mother looked at the file without permission? Not just my mother. David pulled out another piece of paper. Mrs. Higgins said that year, someone else asked her to get a copy. Who? She refused to say. Why? She said that person helped her a lot in the past. She does not want to name them until she is absolutely certain. Chloe looked at David. Do you have any idea who it is? Not yet. The two fell silent. But right at that moment, Chloe's phone buzzed again. A new text message. Do not trust Mrs. Higgins completely. Chloe handed the phone to David. He read it, his expression growing even more severe. This person is watching us, not necessarily, but they know you just met with me. Chloe looked at him. So, what do we do? We do not do anything hastily. David spoke very slowly. We need to verify information from multiple sources. Chloe nodded. She did not want Oliver's life turned upside down by rumors. So they agreed this matter would only be discussed between them, Mrs. Higgins, and David's mother. Oliver was not to know anything else. But that very evening, an unexpected event occurred. Oliver was coloring in his room when he suddenly asked, Mom, did Mr. David come over today? No. I wanted to show him my drawing. Mom will send it to him tomorrow. Oliver thought for a moment, then said, Mom, is Mr. David my dad? Chloe stood dead still. She did not know what Oliver had overheard, but that question made her realize kids can pick up on a lot more than adults think. Chloe sat down next to her son. Why do you ask that? Because he looks at me the same way the dad looks at me in the picture. Chloe stayed quiet. You saw a picture of your dad? On your old phone. Mom. She instinctively remembered an old photo she forgot to delete. A picture of her and David, standing in front of the hospital, when they were still married. Chloe gently held her son's hand. Oliver, there are things Mom will tell you, but not today. So you will tell me later? Yes, I promise. Oliver nodded, then went back to coloring. Chloe watched her son, feeling both heartache and a sense of relief. Because at least she no longer had to lie and say Oliver's dad had passed away. At the same time, David was sitting in his car looking at the copied file and thinking about Mrs. Higgins' words. He called his mother. Mom, I want you to tell me the truth. The other end was silent. Did you ever show Chloe's medical file to anyone else? No. Are you sure? I only gave it to Mrs. Higgins. Why? Because I wanted to know how Chloe was doing. Just that? Eleanor remained silent for a very long time. David realized that silence meant there was still something unspoken. Mom. Finally, she sighed. Someone asked me about Chloe. Who? That person is. Before she could finish her sentence, the call disconnected. David immediately called back, but it did not go through. He hastily drove home. When he walked into the living room, his mother was sitting alone, her face pale. Mom, who was that person? Eleanor looked at her son, then said, It was someone who used to be very close to our family. Who? That person knew about you and Chloe before you two even got married. David frowned. I do not understand. Eleanor looked at him, and finally spoke a name that David had not heard in a very long time. It was Chloe's older sister. David froze. Chloe has an older sister. Eleanor nodded. Yes, but the two sisters lost contact many years ago. David stood motionless. He had never heard Chloe mention an older sister, nor did he know she had any relatives who could be involved in the events from 5 years ago. Why did she know about Chloe? Eleanor looked down at her hands. Because 5 years ago, she was the one who came looking for me. David felt everything in his head become chaotic. What did you talk to her about? She wanted me to keep the baby a secret from you. Why? Eleanor looked up, her voice very quiet. She said Chloe did not want you to know. David shook his head. That is impossible. That is what she said. Chloe tried to find me, you know that. Then why did you still believe her sister? Eleanor could not answer. David turned around, but before he stepped out the door, his mother called out, David. He stopped. Chloe's sister's name is Sarah. He whipped around. Sarah? Eleanor nodded. Yes. David stood paralyzed. Because the woman he had just met, the one who handed him the file from 5 years ago, the one who claimed she only wanted the truth to come to light, turned out to be Chloe's own sister. And what he could not fathom was, if Sarah was Chloe's family, why had she not reached out to her younger sister for the past 5 years? Why hide her identity? And why only show up now, right when David had recognized Oliver? David immediately called Sarah, but her phone was turned off. Meanwhile, Chloe also received one final text message. Chloe, I did not want you to know the truth because I was afraid you would hate me. She read it, and her entire body stiffened. Because the sender this time was not an unknown number. It was Sarah's phone number. Chloe stared at the screen, tears involuntarily welling up. That name she had not heard in 10 years. The name of the sister she thought had vanished from her life. The sister she believed no longer wanted anything to do with her family. Yet now, that name appeared exactly when all the old secrets were being dragged into the light. Her voice trembled as she called back. Sarah, is that you? The other end was silent for a very long time, then a choked-up woman's voice replied. Chloe, I am sorry. Chloe closed her eyes. What did you do to my life? The other end was filled only with the sound of crying. And before the call ended, Sarah said something that left Chloe completely stunned. I did not want to hide the fact that David is Oliver's father. I only wanted to protect you from another truth. Because the day Oliver was born, the person who decided to take you out of the hospital was not David's mother. It was me. Chloe held the phone, feeling as if her entire body was frozen in ice. Sarah's words kept echoing in her head. That, on the day Oliver was born, the The person who made the decision to take her away from the hospital was not David's mother, but Sarah herself, the older sister she had lost touch with for 10 years. The person she thought had completely walked out of her life. Yet now, that name surfaced right when all the mysteries of the past were being unraveled. "What are you saying?" Chloe tried to keep her voice steady, but her hands were shaking. "The day Oliver was born, I was the one who took you out of the hospital." The other end remained silent for a long time, before Sarah replied, "Yes. Why?" "I will tell you, but not over the phone." "Then where are you right now?" "Chloe, do not come looking for me." That sentence made Chloe even more anxious. "You just said you wanted me to know the truth. Now you are telling me not to look for you. What exactly do you want?" "I just want you to hear everything before you decide whether or not to forgive me." Chloe closed her eyes, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. "I do not need you to ask for forgiveness. I just need you to tell me the truth." Sarah did not answer right away, then softly said, "Tomorrow at 5:00 p.m., come to our grandmother's old house. I will be there." The call ended. Chloe sat perfectly still for a long time, until Oliver ran over and hugged her leg, snapping her out of it. She put the phone away. "Mom, why are you crying?" Chloe wiped her eyes. "Mom is not crying. I saw your eyes get red. Because Mom is just a little tired." Oliver looked up at her. "Did Mr. David make you sad?" Chloe shook her head. "Not him." "Then who?" Chloe pulled her son into a hug. In that moment, she realized no matter how complicated adult matters got, she still had to maintain a normal life for Oliver, because the boy had been through too many changes in such a short time. From a dad who didn't exist in his story, now David had appeared, and an aunt he had never known was standing behind a massive secret. At the same time, David was still at his mother's house. In front of him were the documents Sarah had left. He read them over and over, and the more he read, the more he realized the events of 5 years ago were not as simple as he thought. "Mom, why did you never tell me Sarah was Chloe's sister?" Eleanor looked down. "Because Chloe herself did not want to mention her. But you knew she came looking for you." "Yes." "Then why did you believe her?" Eleanor sighed. "That year, Sarah told me Chloe did not want you to know about the pregnancy. That Chloe decided to raise the child alone. She told me not to say anything to you so it wouldn't disrupt your life." David looked at his mother. "But Chloe sent me a text message." "I know. Then why did you still believe Sarah over me?" Eleanor was speechless. David sat down, rubbing his forehead. He did not want to blame his mother, but the more he heard, the more he realized the past 5 years were built on too many misunderstandings, where everyone just knew a fraction of the truth and made decisions on behalf of others. "I need to meet Sarah." Eleanor looked at him. "What are you going to ask?" "I want to know what happened the day Oliver was born." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then said, "David, I think you should listen to Chloe first. Chloe doesn't know everything either. Then you should let her make her own decision." David nodded. "You are right." This was the first time in many years he did not rush to fix everything himself, because he understood this was no longer a problem that logic alone could solve. It involved a woman who had raised a child alone for 5 years, and a boy who had just learned the man in front of him might be his father. The next afternoon, Chloe dropped Oliver off at her cousin's house, telling him to play there for a while, and drove alone to her grandmother's old house, which had been vacant for years. The road leading in was still the same narrow suburban street. The old iron gate was rusty, but still intact. Sarah was already waiting inside. As soon as Chloe saw her sister, her footsteps slowed down. 10 years without seeing each other, Sarah had changed a lot. Her hair had a few gray strands, her face was thinner than before, but her eyes still looked like the sister Chloe remembered. The two sisters looked at each other for a very long time. Finally, Sarah said, "You have grown up so much." Chloe let out a bitter laugh. "You have gotten older too." Both fell silent. The years of separation made even a simple question hard to say. Chloe sat down on the porch steps. "Tell me." Sarah poured her a glass of water, her hands clasped together. "That year, after you and David divorced, I knew you were pregnant. You didn't tell me, but I saw your ultrasound results." Chloe looked up. How? I worked near the clinic. I had an acquaintance in the administration office. I found out by accident. Chloe frowned. By accident? Sarah looked down. Yes. At first, I just wanted to know how you were doing. And then? I met David's mother. Chloe remained silent. That day, David's mother told me if David knew you were pregnant, he would come back purely out of obligation, and you would just continue getting hurt. Chloe looked at her sister. And you believed her. At the time, I believed her. Why? Because I thought David was too busy with his residency, and you were going through the pregnancy alone. I was afraid you two would get back together, and then break up all over again. Chloe smiled coldly. So you decided for me. Sarah did not deny it. Yes. Did you know I wanted to tell him? I knew. Did you know I stayed up all night writing a letter to David? Sarah gave a slight nod. I read that letter. Chloe was stunned. You read it? You left it in the medical folder. I saw it. So you knew I wanted to tell him? Yes. Then why? Sarah burst into tears. Because I was scared. Chloe looked at her. Scared of what? Scared you would end up like Mom. Chloe was confused. What are you talking about? Sarah wiped her tears. Our mom used to hide the fact that our dad left us, thinking if she just raised us on her own, we would be fine. But in the end, we both grew up with an empty void, not understanding why. Chloe fell silent. Sarah continued. I thought I was protecting you. But I ended up doing the exact thing I hated most about adults. Deciding someone else's life for them. Chloe said nothing. Sarah pulled out a stack of old papers from her bag. These are the things I kept from that year. Chloe took them. Inside was a copy of the prenatal results, some hospital paperwork, and a handwritten note. She recognized her own handwriting. The letter she had written to David. Chloe read the first few lines, and tears instantly fell. David, if you receive this letter, it means I have gathered enough courage to tell you that we are having a baby. She could not read any further. Sarah lowered her head. I kept it. Why? Because after you gave birth to Oliver, I started feeling remorse. Then why didn't you give it to him? Because at that time, I thought it was too late. Chloe looked up. No, Sarah, it wasn't too late. You just didn't give us a chance. Sarah cried but did not argue. Do you know what I did the day Oliver was born? Sarah took a deep breath. You went into labor a little earlier than expected. I was the one who took you to the hospital. I remember. But at that time, David was doing his rotation at a different hospital in the city. Chloe froze. You knew. Then why didn't you call him? Sarah was silent for a very long time. Because David's mother called me first. Chloe looked at her sister. What did she say? She didn't want to stop you. What? Sarah looked straight into her younger sister's eyes. She said David was on his way. Chloe stood up abruptly. That is impossible. Sarah grabbed her hand. Listen to me. Did he make it to the hospital? I do not know. Why wouldn't you know? Because after you gave birth, the doctor said you needed to rest. I moved you to a different recovery room. Then someone told me David was looking for you. Chloe felt her head spin. Who was that person? Sarah shook her head. I only remember it was a hospital staff member. So Oliver met his dad the day he was born? No. Sarah shook her head. That person said David had already left because he thought you didn't want to see him. Chloe stood paralyzed. For 5 years she always thought David never knew she had a baby, while David thought she didn't want him to know. But now, another possibility was slowly emerging. That 5 years ago, they were so close to each other, separated by just a hospital door, but a chain of misunderstandings caused them to miss each other. Sarah pulled out another piece of paper. This is what I found later. Chloe looked down. It was a visitor log from the maternity ward. On it was David's name and the exact time he arrived at the hospital. Chloe could not breathe. He really was there. Sarah nodded. Yes. Then why didn't he see me? Because someone told him you had already been discharged. Chloe looked at her sister. But I had not been discharged. I know. The two sisters looked at each other, and for the first time, both understood that the story from 5 years ago was not just about a broken marriage, nor was it just about a mother hiding a child. There was a third person who made sure the two of them could not meet at the most critical moment. Chloe's voice trembled. Who was that person? Before Sarah could answer, the sound of a car pulling up echoed outside the gate. Both turned their heads. David stepped out of his car, holding a file folder. His face was serious, but his eyes softened the moment he saw Chloe. He did not know that just minutes ago, Chloe had learned a truth that could completely change how she viewed the past 5 years. David walked in, looked at Sarah, then at Chloe. I found a nurse who was on shift at the hospital the day Oliver was born. Chloe stood perfectly still. He said someone asked him to tell me that Chloe did not want to see me. Sarah closed her eyes. Chloe turned to look at her sister. You know who that person is, don't you? Sarah did not answer. David also looked at her. Sarah, tell me. Finally, Sarah slowly opened her mouth. That person is someone we both trusted. Chloe looked at Sarah, then at David. A cold, painful sensation suddenly washed over her. Because the phrase someone we both trusted instantly made her think of many people. But the first person who popped into her head was David's mother. The one who called her during her pregnancy, who told her since they were divorced, she should leave him alone. The person she had thought, for the past 5 years, even if she did wrong things, at least wouldn't intentionally harm her. David took a step forward, his voice low but clear. Sarah, tell me, who is it? Sarah looked at him, then at Chloe, and finally whispered, It was your mother. Chloe closed her eyes. But what surprised her was that David did not react violently. He just stood still for a few seconds, as if his heart had already prepared for this possibility, then asked, Do you have proof? Sarah nodded. Yes. She pulled out a carefully wrapped stack of papers from her old bag and placed it on the table. This is the hospital log from the day Oliver was born. And this is a transcript of the conversation between me and your mother. David picked it up and read. His expression gradually changed. In the log, there was the time a family member came looking for Chloe. Then, a hospital staff member noted that the family member was informed the patient did not want to see them. David stared at that line of text for a very long time. I never said that. Sarah nodded. Not you. Chloe looked at Sarah. Then who said it? Sarah slowly answered. David's mother. David looked up. But why? Sarah remained quiet for a moment, then said, Because at that time, she thought if you and Chloe saw each other, you would get back together just because of the baby. But I didn't even know Chloe gave birth. That was exactly what she wanted. Chloe sat down, her hands resting on her knees. She felt so hollow inside that she didn't even have the energy to be angry. She remembered the day she gave birth to Oliver, remembered lying in the small hospital room, hearing babies crying in the rooms next door. Hours passed, and David never showed up. She had thought he didn't come, thought he truly didn't want to know, but it turned out, he was standing in that exact same hospital. David. Chloe called his name very softly. He looked at her. Did you really come that year? Yes. What time did you get there? Around 1:00 p.m. Chloe froze. I gave birth near 11:00 a.m. I know. So you were there? Yes. David lowered his head. I came because a colleague at the hospital told me you were in labor. Chloe looked at him, tears instantly welling up. Then why didn't you see me? David gripped the stack of papers. I was told you didn't want to see me. And you believed it? At the time, I believed it. Chloe gave a tearful laugh. All you had to do was walk in and ask me one question. I know. Just ask. I know. But you didn't ask. David said nothing. The room sank into silence. Neither placed any more blame. Because everyone understood that a question not asked 5 years ago had created an impossibly massive gap. Sarah looked at the two of them, her voice choked up. I am sorry. Chloe turned to her. You could have told me too. I was afraid you would get back with David and continue getting hurt. But that was my choice. I know. Sarah lowered her head. I thought I was protecting you, but as time went on, I didn't know how to fix it. David looked at Sarah. Then why did you keep the files? Because I knew one day the truth would have to come out, Chloe asked. Then were you the one calling me these past few days? Sarah shook her head. No, Both Chloe and David looked at her. It wasn't you? No. Sarah pulled out her phone. I only texted you yesterday. Then who is calling? Sarah thought for a moment, then said, it might be someone else. David immediately asked, who? Sarah looked at him for a long time. I think you should ask your mother. Right at that moment, David's phone buzzed. It was his mother. He stared at the screen for a few seconds, then answered. Mom. The other end was silent. David asked, where are you? I am at home. I want you to talk to me right now. A moment later, Eleanor said, so you know everything? David looked at Chloe. I know a part of it. The other end let out a heavy sigh. I am sorry. I don't need your apology. I need you to tell me the truth. Fine. Did you come to the hospital the day Oliver was born? No. Hearing that, Sarah immediately looked at Chloe, but Chloe said nothing. David continued. Did you ask a hospital staff member to tell me Chloe didn't want to see me? The other end was silent for a very long time. Finally, she replied, yes. Chloe closed her eyes. David lowered his head. His voice was still calm, but raspy. Why? You were afraid I would get back with Chloe just because of the baby? But that is my son. I know that. Did you know I came to the hospital? I knew. David couldn't speak. Chloe couldn't speak either. Eleanor continued. You saw me at the hospital, yet you still let me leave. I thought it was for the best. David laughed bitterly. How could you possibly think that preventing a father from seeing his own child is for the best? Eleanor cried. I was wrong. Not just wrong. David looked out the window. You cost me 5 years. Eleanor did not argue. I am sorry. David sat down. I cannot forgive you right now. I understand. But I also don't want you blaming yourself for the rest of your life. Eleanor's voice choked. Son, I just need you to never make decisions for me again. The other side remained silent for a long time, then replied, okay. The call ended. Chloe looked at David. He sat motionless, his face calm but his eyes red. She didn't know whether to comfort him or keep her distance, because the man in front of her was both the ex-husband she once loved and Oliver's father, but he was also the man who missed 5 years of their son's life. David looked at her. Chloe, I am sorry. She shook her head. You don't need to apologize for someone else. I am sorry for believing you didn't want to see me. You were hurting too, but I am an adult, and Oliver is a child. Chloe fell silent. David continued. I cannot change the last 5 years, but I want everything from now on to be clear. What do you plan to do? I want to officially establish paternity, legally and properly, but I won't do it unless you agree. Chloe looked at him. Are you sure you want this? I am sure. Even if the results aren't what you think? Without hesitation, I still want to take responsibility for Oliver. That sentence left Chloe speechless. David said, if Oliver is my son, I want to be his father through my actions, not just on a piece of paper. Chloe softly asked, and if I don't get back together with you? David looked at her. Then I am still Oliver's father. That answer left Chloe with nothing more to say. Right then, Oliver called his mom from her cousin's house. Mom, is Mr. David there? Chloe looked at David. Yes, let me talk to him. Chloe handed the phone to David. Are you calling me buddy? Are you home yet? Not yet. Do you miss me? David smiled, his eyes turning red. Yes. Then don't forget to draw the dinosaur for me. I will remember. Mr. David. Yes. Don't forget me, okay. David was quiet for a few seconds, then replied, I won't forget you. The call ended. David held onto the phone for a long time. Chloe looked at him, and for the first time, her heart was no longer just filled with defensiveness. She understood that no matter how painful the past was, at least from this moment on, David truly knew Oliver existed, and he was choosing to stay. As the two of them left the old house, Chloe's phone buzzed with a new text message. Chloe, the truth about the day Oliver was born has been told. But there is one more thing you don't know. She looked down. The next message appeared right after. The person who took you out of the hospital 5 years ago was not David's mother, and it was not your sister either. Chloe froze. David took the phone, read the text, and looked at her. So there is another person, Chloe nodded. And that person knows all about Oliver. David gripped the phone tightly. We have to find out who this is. Chloe looked at him, and for the first time, she did not object. Okay. The two walked out of the old driveway, but neither knew that the next answer would not come from a stranger, but from an item Chloe had kept for 5 years in a cardboard box at the bottom of her closet. An item she thought was just a memory from the day Oliver was born, but inside it contained a name sufficient to connect all the missing puzzle pieces together. It was nearly 9:00 p.m. by the time Chloe got home. As soon as Oliver saw his mom, he ran up and hugged her legs, immediately asking if Mr. David was back yet. But Chloe just patted his head and said Mr. David was still busy. She didn't want to tell Oliver that in just one afternoon, the things she thought were buried for 5 years had been dragged into the light one by one. That David knew his mother had stopped him from seeing his son. That Sarah confessed she hid a letter. And most importantly, there was still a third person who showed up the day Oliver was born, whose identity remained a mystery. After Oliver went to sleep, Chloe pulled the old cardboard box from the bottom of her closet and placed it on the table. She sat perfectly still for a long time. She originally never wanted to open it again, because inside were documents from her pregnancy, a few photos of Oliver when he was a newborn, medical bills, a tiny hospital ID bracelet, and an old smartphone that no longer worked. But the recent text message made her realize that if she kept running out of fear, she would never know the truth. David arrived shortly after, but he waited outside the door for her permission before stepping inside. Then the two sat by the small table. Between them was the old box covered in a thin layer of dust. What do you think is in here? David asked very softly. I don't know, Chloe replied. David looked at her and nodded. He understood she still wasn't ready to go back to how things used to be, and he didn't push. The events of the last few days were enough that both needed time. Chloe opened the box and took out each item until the old smartphone rested in the palm of her hand. David looked at it and asked, Does this phone still work? I don't know. It has been a really long time. He plugged in a charging cable. After waiting a few minutes, the screen remained black. But after a few more tries, a low battery icon suddenly appeared, startling Chloe. It still works. David moved his chair closer. Do you remember what is on it? Mostly pictures of Oliver when he was little. Some old text messages, maybe phone numbers. The two waited a bit longer, and the phone lit up. Inside, a lot of old data that hadn't been deleted was still saved. Chloe opened the photo gallery. Each picture that popped up made her feel both love and nostalgia. Oliver as a tiny baby in his bassinet. Oliver learning to sit, learning to walk, holding a spoon for the first time. The first time she dropped him off at daycare. Every photo was a year of life that David had missed. He stared for a very long time, then whispered, You kept all these things for 5 years? Yes. Why? Because I was afraid one day Oliver would ask about his dad, and I wouldn't have anything to show him. David couldn't say a word. Chloe continued scrolling through the phone, and suddenly stopped at the old text messages. There was a text received exactly on the day Oliver was born. There was no sender name, just a phone number that had been deleted from the contacts. The content was very short. Do not leave the hospital before I get there. Chloe stared at the screen. I never saw this message. David looked closer at the text. Is there a timestamp? Yes. Chloe zoomed in on the screen. 9:17 a.m. David did the math. Oliver was born around 11:00 a.m. This was sent before Oliver was born. Chloe nodded. But at that time, I was in the delivery room. My phone was in my bag. I didn't know. David asked. Do you remember if anyone handled your phone after you gave birth? Chloe thought for a moment. I think someone did. Who? A nurse. David looked at her. Do you remember her face? Not clearly. So could this text be from that person? My phone was locked with a passcode at the time. David looked at the screen. Then it could only be someone who knew your passcode. Chloe suddenly froze. Sarah knew her passcode. But she also remembered someone else who knew it. That was David. It wasn't you, Chloe said immediately. David looked at her. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. Chloe looked down. Sarah knew the passcode, but she told me she didn't touch my phone. Then it could be someone else. David pointed to the phone number. We can try looking up information on this number. Chloe nodded. But when David typed the number into the old contact list, a name unexpectedly popped up in the call history, silencing them both. The saved name wasn't a real name. It was just Mrs. Higgins. Chloe frowned. Higgins? The former high school counselor? I don't know. David checked the history. This number called you 3 times in the month before Oliver was born. But all the calls were very short. Chloe tried to remember. I signed up for a parenting class before getting pregnant, but I quit. That's not it. David looked at the duration of the calls. The first call took place right after your prenatal checkup. Chloe went silent. So this person knew you were pregnant, David said. And they might have known about the situation between you and me. Chloe looked at the screen, her heart growing cold. But why save her under Mrs. Higgins? Wait, do you know a Mrs. Higgins? Chloe nodded. She was my high school counselor, but I hadn't spoken to her in years. Right at that moment, Oliver walked out of his room, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Mom, I am thirsty. Chloe immediately put the phone down. You're not asleep yet? I want water. David stood up and poured a glass of water for the little boy. Oliver took the cup and looked at him. Mr. David, when did you get here? Just now. What are you doing? Helping your mom find something. Find what? David looked at Chloe, then replied. Find an old item. After finishing his water, Oliver suddenly asked, Are you my dad? The room fell completely silent. Chloe didn't have time to stop him. David squatted down in front of Oliver, but he didn't answer right away. The promise he made to Chloe, that he wouldn't tell the boy until they were both on the same page, still stood. Why do you ask that? Because Mom looks at you the same way she looks at the picture. David looked at Chloe. Chloe gave a very slight nod. David turned back to Oliver. Your mom will talk to you about this when she feels the time is right. But I have one thing I want you to know. What is it? I care about you very much. Oliver smiled. I care about you too. That innocent answer made David turn his face away for a few seconds. Then he reached out and ruffled Oliver's hair. That is all that matters. Oliver went back to his bedroom. Chloe looked at David. Thank you. I promised you. The two went back to checking the old phone. Then David suddenly noticed that in the Notes app, there was an unfinished paragraph written on the day Oliver was born. He was here. Chloe read it out loud. But I didn't get to see him. She froze. This is my handwriting. David kept reading. I don't understand why everyone is saying he left when I never said I didn't want to see him. Chloe covered her mouth with her hand. The note stopped there. David asked, Do you remember when you wrote this? No, but it proves I knew you were there. Chloe shook her head. No, I only remember someone telling me that you didn't want to see me. David looked at her. So we were both lied to. By both sides. That sentence silenced Chloe. She suddenly realized that for 5 years, both she and David had lived based on what other people told them. Neither was willing to swallow their pride to ask the other a simple question. Chloe looked back at the old phone. In the call history, the number saved as Mrs. Higgins had one final call made on the exact day Oliver was born. It lasted more than 10 minutes. David looked at the timestamp. This call happened after Oliver was born. Chloe frowned. So who did this person talk to? You. But I don't remember. David checked further. It wasn't an incoming call to this phone. Chloe looked at him. What do you mean? It was an outgoing call from another number to this person. He zoomed in on the information. The caller ID was saved under a name that made Chloe instantly turn pale. Sarah. David saw it too. Your sister called this person after Oliver was born. Chloe sat paralyzed. David said nothing, because they both understood the next question was no longer who stopped them from meeting. It was, who did Sarah call right after Oliver was born? And was that person the one who took Chloe out of the hospital? Chloe picked up her phone and called Sarah. This time, Sarah answered. Sarah, who did you call on the day Oliver was born? The other end was silent. Who are you asking about? The person saved is Mrs. Higgins. Sarah sighed. You found it. Tell me. That person is your old high school counselor. Why did you call her? Sarah didn't answer right away. When Chloe thought the call had dropped, Sarah finally spoke. Because she was the last person to see the one who took you out of the hospital. Chloe and David looked at each other. Sarah continued, her voice choking up. And I know who that person is. Chloe kept the phone to her ear, but after Sarah's words, she could barely breathe. Because over the past few days, every clue just led from one person to another. Just when she thought they had reached the truth, another layer of secrets appeared. And now Sarah was saying she knew the last person who saw the one who took her out of the hospital. That meant there was still a direct witness to everything that happened 5 years ago. Tell me, who is it? Sarah stayed quiet for a moment, then replied. That person is Mrs. Higgins, your old high school counselor. Chloe was stunned. Mrs. Higgins. Yes, the one who helped you during your senior year. Later, she moved into social work, helping women in difficult situations. The day you gave birth, she coincidentally was at the hospital bringing a former student in for an exam. Chloe tried to recall the woman's face, but she couldn't. Why did Mrs. Higgins know about me? Because I called her. What for? To ask her to confirm something. Confirm what? I wanted to know who the person taking you out of the hospital that day was. David, who had been sitting quietly next to her the whole time, immediately asked, Did Mrs. Higgins know? Sarah replied, She knew. Then why didn't she say anything until now? Because she promised someone she wouldn't tell. Chloe felt her heart racing. Promised who? Sarah sighed. The very person who took you out of the hospital. David looked at Chloe and signaled her to put it on speakerphone. Sarah continued. Chloe, that day I thought I was helping you stay away from David. But the further along it went, the more I realized I had gotten swept into something I couldn't control. What did you do? I had you transferred out of the hospital because someone told me it wasn't safe for you there. Chloe furrowed her brows. Not safe? Right. But I had just given birth. The doctor hadn't even cleared me for discharge. I know. Then why did you still move me? Sarah's voice broke. Because that person handed me a letter. What letter? A letter saying that if you stayed at the hospital, David would find out about Oliver, and his family would find a way to take full custody of the child. Chloe went numb. David immediately said, That is absolutely not true. Now I know that, Sarah replied. But 5 years ago, I didn't know. Chloe closed her eyes. Pieces of memory began surfacing. That day, right after giving birth, her mind was exhausted. She only remembered Sarah saying she needed to be moved to a different hospital for observation because there was a problem with her paperwork. At the time, she trusted her sister because she had no energy left to suspect anyone. So who was that person? Sarah said. I don't want to tell you over the phone. Chloe immediately replied. You have to tell me. No, I need you to hear it in person. David looked at Chloe. We will go meet her. Chloe asked. Where? Sarah was quiet for a few seconds. Tomorrow, at Mrs. Higgins' house. David said, I am going with you, Chloe. Okay. The call ended. Chloe sat perfectly still. David stayed right beside her. Nobody spoke for a few minutes. Finally, he broke the silence. I am sorry. Chloe looked at him. For what? For 5 years ago. If I had just been patient enough, maybe everything would have been different. Chloe gently shook her head. It wasn't just your fault, I know. But from now on, stop blaming yourself constantly. David looked at her. I just regret the lost time. Chloe looked toward the room where Oliver was sleeping. Me too. For the first time in years, Chloe unconsciously dropped her defensive tone. Then she herself froze, but David said nothing. He just looked down and gave a very faint smile. The next morning, the two of them drove to Mrs. Higgins' house, a small house situated on a quiet suburban street in Seattle. The front porch was lined with potted plants. Mrs. Higgins looked older than in Chloe's memories, but she still had the same kind eyes. The moment she saw Chloe, she walked out and held her hands. Chloe, I am so sorry. Chloe choked up. You knew about my situation? Yes. So you know who took me out of the hospital, Mrs. Higgins looked at David, then nodded. I know. David asked. Was it my mother? Mrs. Higgins shook her head. No. Both Chloe and David were stunned. Then who was it? Mrs. Higgins sighed. It was someone in Chloe's own family. Chloe felt her heart drop. That is impossible. Mrs. Higgins looked at her. Chloe. That day, I asked that person why they had to do this. They said they only wanted to protect you. Who was it? Mrs. Higgins didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled an old journal from her cabinet. This is my logbook from that year. David took it. Inside were dates, times, and names of people at the hospital. The notes were very brief. Under the exact date Oliver was born, there was a line that made Chloe's blood run cold. Family member arrived to pick up patient, confirming patient does not want to see the child's father. Next to that line was a name. Chloe saw her own name listed as the patient. And the person who picked her up was listed as your brother. She gasped out loud. I have a brother? David was surprised. Chloe shook her head. No, I only have Sarah. Mrs. Higgins looked at her for a long time. That is what I didn't understand either. Sarah told me that your family had an older half-brother from your mother's previous marriage, but you never knew about him because he was sent to live far away when you were very young. Later on, he completely lost contact with the family. Chloe sat paralyzed. For her entire life, she thought Sarah was her only sibling. Yet now she was finding out she had an older half-brother. Someone she had never met, never even heard of. Yet he showed up on the day her son was born. David asked, what is his name, Mrs. Higgins pointed to the name in the logbook. Oliver. Chloe froze. Oliver. Mrs. Higgins nodded. Yes. David immediately looked at Chloe. Your son is also named Oliver. Chloe couldn't speak. She didn't understand why an older brother she never knew shared the exact same name as her son. Mrs. Higgins explained. That was the name on his ID. But I don't know where he lives now. Chloe held the journal, her hands shaking. This is impossible, Mrs. Higgins said. Chloe, I know this is incredibly hard to believe, but I saw that man physically take you out of the hospital. David asked. Where did he take her? I don't know. Then who asked him to do this? Mrs. Higgins looked at the two of them. The person who requested it was a woman. Chloe instantly asked, who? Mrs. Higgins slowly answered. David's mother. David closed his eyes. So even though the person who physically drove Chloe away wasn't his mother, she was still involved. But what hurt Chloe the most was that she never knew she had an older brother. She turned to Mrs. Higgins. Where is he now? I don't know. Do you have any way to contact him? Mrs. Higgins pulled out a slip of paper. There is an old address. David took it. On the paper was the name of a rural town in Oregon, along with a dated street address. Chloe stared at the writing, a mix of fear and anticipation growing in her chest. She didn't know who this brother she had never met was. Nor did she know why her mother had hidden his existence for so many years. But one thing was certain. The story from 5 years ago went far deeper than she or David ever imagined. David said, we are going to find him. Chloe nodded. But first, I want to know why your mother asked him to take me away. Mrs. Higgins looked at her. I think you need to ask her yourself. Chloe remained silent. At that exact moment, David's phone rang. It was his mother, he answered. Mom. The other side simply said one sentence. David, I want to see you and Chloe. Why? Because I think it is time to tell you everything. David looked at Chloe. When? Today. The call ended. Chloe stood up, gripping the slip of paper tightly. She knew she was about to face the person who played a massive role in altering her entire life. But this time, she was no longer the woman from 5 years ago who only knew how to suffer in silence. She had Oliver. She had David standing with her to find the truth. And most importantly, she no longer wanted anyone making decisions on her behalf. Before they left Mrs. Higgins' house, she suddenly called out to Chloe. Chloe. Yes? Do you remember the day you gave birth to Oliver? Chloe nodded. I remember. That day, before you were taken away, a man came up and asked me a question. Who? I don't know his name. What did he ask? Mrs. Higgins looked at David, then said. He asked if the baby was David's son. David froze. And what did you say? I said yes. Mrs. Higgins paused for a moment. And that man only said one sentence before he left. Chloe asked, what did he say? Mrs. Higgins looked straight at her. He said, if it really is David's son, then David absolutely must know. Chloe stood in stunned silence. Because that statement proved that at least one person back then wanted the truth to be told. But why David still didn't find out, and who that man was, remained an unsolved mystery. Chloe turned to David. Let's go. David nodded. The two walked out of the house. But this time, they weren't seeking the past just to lay blame. They were seeking the lost years, to give Oliver the truth he deserved to know from the very first day. And waiting ahead of them was a meeting with David's mother, where one final secret would be revealed. Not just about the day Oliver was born, but about why Chloe's own family had hidden the existence of an older brother for her entire childhood. Chloe and David arrived at his mother's house just as the sun was setting. During the entire drive, neither said much. What they had just learned required a moment of silence for each to process. But as the door opened, seeing Eleanor sitting alone in the living room, looking utterly exhausted, Chloe realized that tonight, no one could hide anymore. The secrets kept for 5 years, the decisions supposedly made out of love, the misunderstandings that broke a family apart. Everything had to be put on the table and clearly addressed. Eleanor stood up as the two walked in. Her gaze lingered on Chloe for a very long time, before she softly said, Chloe, I am so sorry. Chloe did not sit down right away. She stood still for a few seconds, then pulled out a chair. Her voice was calm. I did not come here for an apology. I want the truth. Eleanor nodded. I know. David sat next to Chloe. He didn't say anything, but his hands resting on his knees were clenched tight. He too wanted to hear everything. Not as a son questioning his mother, but as a father who missed the first 5 years of his son's life. Eleanor looked at them and began to speak, her voice slow and broken. She explained that 5 years ago, when she found out Chloe was pregnant, she was terrified. Not because she didn't want a grandchild, but because she believed their marriage had reached its breaking point. She was afraid that if David knew, he would go back to Chloe, out of sheer obligation. Then they would continue living an unhappy life. And ultimately, the one who would suffer the most would be the child. But you didn't give me the chance to make my own decision, David said. Eleanor lowered her head. True. And you told Chloe I didn't want to know. That is true. I went to the hospital. Eleanor closed her eyes. I know. Hearing this, tears finally broke free from Chloe's eyes. Then why did you tell me he never came? Eleanor looked at her. Because I thought if you two saw each other, things would just get more complicated. Chloe smiled bitterly. I laid in that delivery room waiting for him. David turned to look at her, his eyes red. I know. Chloe looked back at him. But at the time, I didn't know. You didn't know I was waiting either. A long silence stretched out. Eleanor wiped her tears. I was wrong, but there is one thing I want to make clear. What is it? Chloe asked. The person who took you out of the hospital that day wasn't me. David looked at her. Then who was it? Eleanor remained silent for a long time, then said, it was a relative from Chloe's side of the family. Chloe instantly thought of Mrs. Higgins' words. The brother I never knew about. Eleanor nodded. Yes, but I don't have a brother. You do. Chloe looked bewildered. Eleanor looked at her and said, his name is Oliver. He is your mother's son from before she married your father. Chloe was completely stunned. Then why did I never know? Because when you were little, your father sent him away to live somewhere else. Your mother didn't want you to know, because she was afraid it would cause more family conflict. Chloe sat paralyzed. For her entire life, she thought she only had Sarah as a sister, and now she was finding out she had an older half-brother. A man she had never met, never even heard of. Yet he showed up on the day her son was born. David asked, where is he now? In your father's old hometown in Oregon. Eleanor handed them a piece of paper. This is the last address I knew. Chloe took it, her hands shaking. Why did he take me out of the hospital? Because Sarah asked him to. Chloe looked toward the doorway. She hadn't realized Sarah had just arrived. Sarah walked in, her eyes red. I asked him to move you to a different room because I thought someone was looking for you. Who? Sarah shook her head. I wasn't sure. I didn't ask. But why did you tell him that I didn't want to see him? Sarah looked down. That was my mistake, she said. Yes. Chloe looked at her sister. You told the hospital staff. Sarah nodded. I was afraid he would find you, and everything would get complicated again. David didn't yell. He just sighed. Do you realize how many years you cost us? I know, Sarah cried. That is why I came to find you. Chloe looked at her sister for a very long time, then said, I cannot forgive you right away. I understand. But I also don't want to lose my sister again. Sarah looked up, tears falling. Chloe reached out and held her sister's hand. We all made mistakes. David sat beside them, watching the two sisters, and stayed silent. Because he understood, this was not the time for him to interject. There are wounds that only family can heal. A moment later, Eleanor brought out a small box. Chloe, this is what I kept for 5 years. Chloe opened it. Inside was the letter she had written to David but never sent. She looked at her own handwriting, and tears fell again. David didn't snatch it away. He just asked, Do you want me to read it? Chloe shook her head. No need. She folded the letter. Whatever needs to be said, I will say it to you directly now. David nodded. Okay. Chloe looked at him. I don't know if we can ever go back to the way we were. I am not forcing it. I also don't want Oliver growing up in a home where his parents are only together for his sake. I understand. But if you truly want to be Oliver's dad, I won't stop you. David looked at her, his voice deepening. I don't just want to be Oliver's dad. Chloe stayed silent. I want to be the person you needed 5 years ago. But I know we can't turn back time. He paused. So I won't ask you to forget the past. I just want the chance to rebuild trust. Chloe looked at him for a long time. Then let's start with Oliver. David nodded. Deal. I don't need you to call me your husband right now. And I can't call you my wife yet. I know. But in front of Oliver, if he asks later, we will tell him the truth. David smiled. That is what I want the most. In the days that followed, everything gradually became more peaceful. David started appearing in Oliver's life in the most natural way possible. He took his son to the bookstore, sat next to him while he did coloring books, and on weekends, the three of them went to the park. With David, Oliver just wanted Mr. David to sit and listen to his stories from preschool. And David patiently listened to every single one. Not because he needed to prove anything, but because he understood that a child doesn't need expensive toys. A child needs a real adult to be present when they want to be heard. One evening, Oliver was sitting between the two of them when he suddenly asked, Mom, is Mr. David my dad? Chloe looked at David, then at her son. Yes, Mr. David is your dad. Oliver looked confused for a few seconds, then turned to David. Then why weren't you living with me before? David remained quiet, then crouched down to his son's eye level. Because a long time ago, Mom and Dad had some misunderstandings. Dad didn't know you were here, and Mom didn't know Dad was trying to find you guys. Oliver thought about it for a very long time. So now you know? Yes. So you won't leave me again? David looked at his son, his eyes turning red, but his voice was steady. No. Oliver reached out and hugged his neck. Then that is good. Chloe turned her face away to wipe a tear. Because there are answers that adults take 5 years to articulate. But a child only needs to hear. I won't leave you to feel at peace. A few months later, David and Chloe took Oliver to file the legal paperwork to officially establish paternity. Not to fight over custody, but so Oliver could have a clear, legally defined family. To have a father, a mother, and the right to know who he was. Sarah also slowly integrated back into Chloe's life. It took the two sisters a long time to be able to talk like they used to. But this time, they stopped making decisions for each other. If there was an issue, they sat down and talked it out directly. Because they had learned that love without respect can sometimes become a rope that chokes the people you care about most. Eleanor also visited Oliver often. But she didn't rush to make the boy call her grandma. She just sat nearby, listening to her grandson tell stories. Until one day, Oliver naturally called out, "Grandma, come back next week, okay?" Eleanor turned away to wipe her tears. Yes, Grandma will come back. As for Chloe and David, they didn't immediately jump back into a relationship. Both understood that a broken marriage couldn't magically become perfect just because of a child. They started over with the smallest things: eating dinner together, dropping Oliver off at school together, talking through disagreements, and most importantly, never letting anyone else make decisions for them again. One morning, Oliver sat in the back seat and yelled out, "Dad, Mom, hurry up, or I will be late for school." Chloe and David looked at each other and laughed. David opened the car door for his son, while Chloe stood nearby. The morning sunlight spilled onto the driveway. It was so peaceful that she suddenly remembered the rainy night years ago, when she carried her feverish son into the ER and reunited with the man she thought was gone from her life forever. If Oliver hadn't gotten a fever that night, if she hadn't taken him to that specific hospital, if David hadn't been the attending doctor on shift, they probably would have kept living in two different worlds, each holding on to their own version of the past, continuing to believe they were abandoned by the other. But life doesn't always hand people answers through grand events. Sometimes, it just quietly places a child between two people, forcing them to look back at their misunderstandings, to learn how to say the things that should have been said long ago, and to learn how to forgive. Not to forget the pain, but to realize that lost years cannot be reclaimed, but the days ahead can still be lived better. Chloe looked at David and softly said, "Let's go." David nodded. "Yeah, let's all go." The three of them got into the SUV. In the back seat, Oliver was laughing and talking nonstop. Chloe looked out the window. The sky was unusually clear that morning. She suddenly understood that some separations are not meant to end a story, but to allow the people involved to grow up, to learn to appreciate each other more. And when given the chance to meet again, they are no longer the same people they were 5 years ago. Ultimately, happiness isn't about returning exactly to the way things were. It is about the fact that, after all the misunderstandings, there is still someone willing to stay, willing to listen, willing to fix mistakes, and willing to rebuild a home with pure sincerity. For Chloe, the most precious thing wasn't that David became her husband again. It was that from that day on, Oliver never had to ask where his dad was anymore. Because every time the boy turned around, the dad he thought had gone very far away was always right there, smiling and waiting for him. Dear listeners, the story of Chloe, David, and Oliver draws to a close here. A story that began on a rainy night, with a child's fever. And from that seemingly chance encounter, things hidden for years were dragged into the light one by one. Perhaps the most agonizing part wasn't the divorce itself, nor the years they lived apart. It was that simply because of a few words, a few misunderstandings, and decisions made in the name of love, a father didn't know he had a son, a mother had to raise a child alone, and a little boy grew up wondering why a figure was missing from his life. Through this story, we can see a very simple truth. Sometimes what drives people apart isn't a massive tragedy, but a single sentence left unsaid at the right time. One person assumes the other doesn't need them. The other assumes they've been abandoned. So each suffers in silence in their own way, until by the time they meet again, too much time has slipped away. Therefore, in life, if you still care for someone, if you still have something to say, please do not let silence speak for you. Parents as well. Loving your children does not mean you can decide everything for them. There are parents who, out of excessive worry, interfere in their children's marriages, in how they raise their kids, and in choices that the younger generation should be taking responsibility for themselves. Filial piety means respecting your parents, but it doesn't mean handing your entire life over to someone else's decisions. The older generation has experience, the younger generation has their own lives. Only when both sides know how to listen to one another can a family truly become a place to return to. As for the people who have hurt us, forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean forgetting everything that happened. Sometimes, forgiveness simply means refusing to let the old pain dictate the rest of your days. Chloe cannot reclaim her lost 5 years. David cannot travel back to the day Oliver was born to start over, but they can choose a different way to live starting today. and that is what is truly valuable. In a person's life, money can be earned back, a career can be restarted, a house can be rebuilt, but the time spent with parents, children, and loved ones can never be returned. So, if today you can still call your parents, make the call. If there is a child waiting for you to ask how their day was, ask them. If you still have an apology in your heart, say it out loud. If there is a relative you haven't seen in a long time, take the first step toward them. Because in the end, what remains in a family isn't who won the argument, or who was right and who was wrong. It is how people treated each other during the years they still had the chance to be together. A little compromise can save a home. A sincere word can mend a relationship. A kind action can sometimes change a person's entire life. We hope that after listening to this story, each of us will better appreciate the people who are still by our sides, know how to uphold love, loyalty, and duty, and most importantly, know how to live kindly even when no one is watching. Because life is very long, but a human lifetime is so short. Do not wait until you want to speak a word of love, only to find the person who needed to hear it is no longer there.